Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Pam. I'm part of the UK BIM Alliance exec team, and I will be the host for this webinar this morning. I'm having some technical issues with my slides, so I'm not going to try and share my slides. But if you have questions, please use the GoToWebinar question tab, ask them through that. Avoid the raise hand option. Just to note, this webinar is being recorded. You are in listen-only mode, and the recording will be available next week via the UK BIM Alliance YouTube channel. As mentioned, we have a series of these webinars. We've had 3 take place yesterday, and we have 3 planned for today. This one, I'll shortly hand over to May and Simon. They will talk through information protocol. We have a webinar at 12 o'clock around part E, and then 2 o'clock this afternoon we're talking about part D. Let me first share with you a video that gives us a bit more information on the UK BIM framework. Bear with me.
Welcome to this webinar about the guidance supporting the BS-EN ISO 19650 series of standards. The UK BIM framework is supported by BSI, CDBB and the UK BIM Alliance.
I'm Sarah Davidson.
And I'm David Churcher.
And along with Anne Kemp, we're co-editors of the ISO 19650 guidance.
The guidance is supported by a group of dedicated individuals who give their time and expertise for free. These individuals might be authoring or providing feedback on the content.
And you can see that David, Anne and I work alongside them in the management, editing and publication of the guidance. We also work closely with CDBB, who lead on the presentation of the guidance. The ISO 19650 series currently comprises Part 1, 2, 3 and 5. Part 1 covers the overall concepts of information management using BIM. Part 2 is specific to the delivery phase, design and construction of assets, and Part 3 covers the operational phase. Part 5 sets the requirements for the adoption of a security-minded approach to information management as a whole.
ISO 19650 Part 4 is currently under development, and it's due to be released hopefully in early 2022. The guidance was first published in April 2019 in the form of concepts guidance. Part 2 guidance followed in July and has been subject to update and expansion every quarter since then. We welcome and encourage feedback from the whole community, as this is fundamental to shaping the direction of the guidance. So if you have feedback on the guidance, please do email us on guidancefeedback@ukbimframework.org.
The 4th edition of ISO 19650 Part 2 guidance was 160 plus pages long, and this was clearly becoming unwieldy, and some of the key feedback from industry was that we needed to make the guidance more accessible. So in July of this year, we developed a new guidance structure that you can see here. We now have Part 1 guidance setting out the concept of the ISO 19650 series overall. Part 2 guidance considers the specific requirements of ISO 19650 Part 2, and Part 3 guidance, which has only recently been released, is starting to explain the requirements of ISO 19650 Part 3.
In addition, we have guidance parts A to F, which are intended to cut across the whole of the ISO 19650 series, and they cover key themes where detailed guidance is considered necessary. Guidance for Part 5 will be developed by the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure, CPNI, in due course.
So Guidance A covers the information management function and resources. It considers the activities that need to be carried out and offers a resource map supporting the information management framework.
Guidance B covers open data and building smart topics. It will also cover COBie but this section is not yet written.
And Guidance C covers the common data environment in terms of workflow and technology. It looks at assignment of metadata as required by the National Annex to ISO 19650 Part 2 as well.
Guidance D is all about information requirements. It explains the fundamentals of what they're trying to do and the details of different types of requirements with some very detailed examples.
Guidance E currently covers the BIM execution plan in supporting tendering and appointment activities. It will be extended in due course with content to cover more tendering and appointment resources.
And finally, Guidance F covers information delivery planning. This includes the responsibility matrices and the task and master information delivery plans. It also has space for guidance on the Federation strategy, but again, this is not written yet.
We hope this provides you with a little insight into the development of the guidance, and we'll hand you over to the more detailed guidance discussion just now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, David. I am now going to hand over to May to kick off the main element of this webinar. So May, over to you. You're still muted, May.
Thanks, Pam. Let me make sure I'm sharing the. Am I sharing the correct screen? Sorry, I can't tell.
You need to put it in presenter mode, so we can see all your slides.
It did say I am in presenter mode. This is where technology fails us. It says I am sharing screen.
You are sharing screen, but you're
okay.
what you're
like that. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, now we've got that sorted. Thanks everyone for joining. As you'll all be in listen only mode, there's a handy picture there on where you can type your questions and just saying avoid the raise hand option. And this will be, I understand, uploaded onto the UK BIM Alliance YouTube channel. There's various webinars taking place. I urge you to attend all the other ones presented by some great experts. But today we will be talking about the information protocol and the updates that have taken place primarily to the guidance. A bit about me, my name's May Winfield. I'm the Head of Commercial and Legal for Cities and Digital at Buro Happold. I am one of the co-authors of the information protocol. I have been heavily involved in BIM for many years, as well as other areas of construction technology, and I'm a UK BIM Alliance ambassador. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. So apologies for the slight technology virus, which seems to have got us today. Got me as well, but managed to make it. Yes, I'm a partner and the head of disputes in the construction engineering team at Womble Dickinson, but my other thing is BIM, which I've been very heavily involved in for a number of years. I am another co-author of the ISO 19652 information protocol, also involved in BIM for Legal, like May, and have worked in the past on PAS 1192.5, and I'm currently also a workstream lead for the BIM interoperability expert group, looking at procurement for interoperability. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Simon. Just now to take you through the updates. One of the things we found is that there was some confusion in terms of how you fill in the information particulars, so the cover page of the information protocol. Now, those of you who've seen the information protocol will be aware there's no appendices. Instead, there's one cover page at the beginning, so you can't miss it. And this is to avoid the issue we found with the CIC BIM protocol where the appendices were not being completed, and that had a really serious impact to the legal enforceability. Now, the information particulars is divided into to who and what, so who the parties are, what the project is, and you fill that in. And then there's a whole list of documents, and you fill in the ones which are relevant to you. So, for example, some of them may not be relevant, where the appointment is between the appointing party and the lead appointed party. The TIDP won't be relevant, and so forth. There may be some documents which are not in existence yet, but will be in existence shortly after you fill in the information protocol, and then you should go back and complete those. The location of the documents may change, and then you go back to the information particulars and update that over time. So it's a living list of where all the key information and documents are regarding your particular BIM project. Another one that we found was causing some confusion was the various terminology. Now, there's been a lot of content added to assist on that, including some handy graphics. But by way of explanation, you will be either an appointer or appointee. So you're the one doing the appointing, you're the one paying the bills, or you're the one getting appointed, or you're the one receiving the money, you're the one doing the services. So you're one or the other. And then you will also be, for purposes of the ISO, you'll be the appointing party, the lead appointed party, or the appointed party. You know which one of those you are. So think you're either A or B, and then you're C, D, or E. Once you know that, when you look through the protocol, all the ones which apply to you, for example, if you are A and C, all the appointer and appointing party clauses apply to you, and so forth. And we hope that clarifies it. We appreciate the terminology using, say, appointer is a similar word to appointing party, but we would also note that this is a template. So if you prefer, you could replace the word appointer with the client's name. For example, if the appointer is a client, and appointee with the other party's name, if you would find that easier reading. And I've also added various clarification, one being that this information protocol is for the delivery phase. So ISO 19650 Part 2 and Part 5. Now, whilst Part 5 does not refer to information protocol expressly, it does require that there's provision in all appointment documentation for the ISO 19650 Part 5. And we've made sure that the information protocol complies with it, so you don't have to have additional clauses within your appointment. It is not appropriate for the maintenance phase. So ISO 19650 Part 3, we are in the process of drafting an information protocol for that phase, which is very different in its operation. Another thing we have clarified is that this is for appointments between separate legal entities. So for actual appointments between parties, whilst it could be used as reference for internal processes, it's really meant for your contracts, your appointments. Another thing to point out is that it's appointment agnostic. So it's good for standard forms, for bespoke, two-party, alliancing, multi-party. When I talk about multi-party, I mean any appointment which is more than two people. It's drafted so that you can pick it up and it doesn't matter what form of appointment you're using. However, to assist in terms of alliancing and multi-party appointments, we have added in the guidance one simple clause to make it clear how the appointment applies in those situations. We would say it applies anyway, but it just clarifies it further and avoids you having to chop and change the appointment in a lot of ways. But it is an important point, and it is something that is a specific question that we have had raised about whether it's suitable in all these circumstances. Another one, we've added various reminders. One, that this is a template. And as with all templates, your standard form contracts, you'll all be very familiar with. You can add to it for project-specific points where certain things need tweaking because it needs to be more suitable for how you are interacting with the other party. Again, this is a template and that's what it's designed to do. However, if you are amending it, we would say do get professional advice. It is a contractual document. Changing one word in a contractual document can have a very big impact. As I said earlier, there's various reminders within the guidance that you shouldn't be using it for the operational maintenance phase. There is another information protocol for that coming out. And from our experience, since it's been issued, we have also put in a reminder that for the information protocol to be used, you need both an incorporation clause. So the clause within the guidance, which basically says the information protocol is part of the contract and a part of the appointment. And you need to actually attach it as part of the appointment documents. For example, whether it's in the schedule, or one of the schedules, or if you're using a form of appointment like the NEC, you may put it in the body of the appointment itself. It's not enough to refer to it as one of the list of the standards, which I've seen several times over the last year, where say a client lists, these are the standards we want you to comply with, and they list all the ISOs, and then they list the information protocol as well. It's a contractual document. It won't have any effect doing it that way. We tidy up various terminology and language so it makes it easier reading. We've always endeavored to have it with as little legalese and as simple, straightforward language as possible. And we've added some pretty and useful graphics. Again, as I said earlier, talking about, for example, who the appointer and the appointee is, and how the flow of where you attach the information protocol in the various appointments to try and make it a bit easier for people to understand if they're picking it up for the first time. And that's all really a summary of all the updates. Now, Simon's going to take you through an example of using the information protocol. Simon, over to you.
Very much, May. Given our fun and games with technology this morning, May will keep control of the screen rather than handing over to me, because if I get my hands on it, something will go wrong. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to do that next slide bit. So just to explain, thank you. When we were discussing my bit of this, it didn't seem that it would be particularly interesting for you if I just went through the various clauses in the protocol, since you all, I'm sure, already know what they are. And if not, I encourage you to read through the protocol, which hopefully will give some flesh to what we're about to cover. What we thought we'd do was we'd have a sort of, as May says, an example of a project. And so I will just go through at quite a high level the general structure of the protocol, having sort of looked at a number of parties involved in a specific contractual scenario. By no means the only contractual scenario that the protocol can apply to, because as May has said, it can apply to any contractual scenario. It may need to be added to slightly or tweaked to, excuse me, reflect the underlying contractual structure, but that, of course, is the idea with the template. So this is our example. The project is called Gilder House, and there's a picture of it. Interesting bit of architecture in the city centre, surrounded by other buildings, next to its own car park, by the look of it. Next slide, please. And here are the parties to this contract. Now, the appointing party, or if you like, the client, and also therefore the appointor, is Florin Developments. Florin is obviously has wanted to present itself as being at the forefront of contractual and construction practice, is using modern methods of construction, is exploring all sorts of ways of making this an exemplar project, so has decided not to use one of the standard forms, but instead has developed its own bespoke collaborative contract in which all of the major parties sign up. They have individual appointments with each other, with Florin, which set out their individual obligations, rights and obligations, risk allocation, and so on. They also have appointments with each other and with Florin in relation to collaboration. So we have a multi-party appointment. So the contractor, who is therefore in this case the lead appointing party and also an appointee, because appointed by Florin, is Wesley Construction, and then other appointees also appointed by Florin are Montoya Steelworks, Rugen M&E, and Vecini Architects. An extra point, by the way, to anyone who spots where all these names come from. Yeah, give you a clue, it's a film. Next slide, please. So what we would do when we were starting to complete the information protocol is, of course, fill in the front page, which identifies where all of the information particulars can be found and who the parties are. This is vitally important, as May has said. If you don't do this, then really the protocol isn't going to work. If you do this and absolutely nothing else, then the protocol is drafted in such a way that it will still work. But obviously you may need to think about whether it needs to be adjusted slightly to suit your particular contractual context. So in this particular case, the appointees would obviously, there'd be more than one. And so I would suggest in this case, you couldn't do what May suggested you could do if you had just two parties to appointment and actually go through the protocol and replace the names appointee and appointor and so on with the actual parties. It would be too clumsy. So in this case, I suspect it's best to leave the terminology within the protocol itself as it is, but obviously being aware that actually each individual appointee shares these obligations and responsibilities with Florin as appointor, and precisely how those play out as in relation to each appointee, of course, is reflected in the underlying contract, because you'll obviously always read the protocol with the contract. In this particular case, also, as May has mentioned, you would add, if you wanted to, the new clause 1.8, and a slight tweak to the definition of party in clause 13. This is in the guidance, so have a look at that to see how we think that would assist. Next slide, please. So let's just have a quick look at Florin's obligations as the appointing party or appointor as the client. Obviously, it has basic obligations in relation to establishing the information particulars, into making sure that they are complete and update as necessary, because don't forget, this is a living document. Various aspects of the documentation that forms the information particulars are developed as the project proceeds. And it's obviously Florin's responsibility also to make sure it appoints the appropriate individuals to carry out this work on its behalf, or delegates it to other parties. What Florin should also do is carry out a sensitivity assessment, a security triage. As May has mentioned, excuse me, the ISO 19655, which deals with security, doesn't reflect back directly to the other ISOs, but does require appropriate clauses to be put into every appointment document. So the protocol has a requirement for Florin to consider whether in fact there are any sensitive issues, any security-minded aspects it needs to consider under or near to the development. And having carried out that sensitivity assessment, in this case, in fact, there are not. So it doesn't need to go on and do the other things that it's required to do as set out in the protocol in relation to security requirements. It should, however, revisit this issue from time to time because things change. And in fact, the ISO 19655 does the option to approach this project in a security-minded way anyway, since obviously 5 is about security generally and not just in the context, say, of BIM or something more specific. So in this case, however, Florin decides it doesn't have to do that. It's just mindful, if you like, of the security issue going forward. Then, of course, again, as employer or client or appointor, it has to appoint those responsible for establishing, implementing, and generally getting the CDE solution and workflow running. Arrange for storage and preservation of information containers, and ensure that the appointees can have access to the information in the CDE workflow and solution. It also, of course, has responsibilities as employer to establish information management parameters, appoint others to do that if necessary, carry out its information management tasks as set out in clause 6.2. Next slide, please. And then just finishing up the important provisions. I'll come back to some of the others in a minute. The important provisions in clause 8 about IP rights and the granting of licenses obviously is something that Florin will have to do to ensure that the relevant parties have the rights to use the material being produced, the information being produced for the project, but specifically only for its permitted purpose, for purposes in relation to the project itself. The way that clause 8 is set out is that if, in fact, the appointment that Florin had drafted had absolutely no IP rights at all in relation to this aspect of the matter, there is a mechanism set out in clause 8 to facilitate the granting of the right licenses between the parties. But in fact, if there are adequate IP provisions, then the protocol doesn't apply in that respect. And in this particular case, because Florin is up to speed with these things, it's put correct IP rights and license granting powers into the relevant part of the appointment. And these deal comprehensively with all IP rights. So in fact, you don't need to look at clause 8 or to apply it too closely because, say, Florin is on the ball, fortunately. Another aspect that I've highlighted is the capturing of lessons learned in relation to, as in clause 9, in relation to the project, because it's often the case that information generated, knowledge generated during the course of the project sort of drifts away. But also, of course, you need to make sure that the information management that you are involved in over the course of the delivery phase is ready to be handed over for the operational phase, because this is obviously just part of the life of the building. From that perspective, this is just to be seen as the first step. And as May has said, in fact, we'll be looking at drafting an information management protocol for part 3 in due course. It will be coming later on this year, I hope. There we go, committed us to that. Part of that is to obviously tie in the gathering of information from the project. Next slide, please. So thanks, this is just sort of summing up here, and I've got a couple of minutes, so I'll just go through fairly briskly the obligations of the others. Don't forget, we've got Wesley, that's also the lead appointed party, Montoya, Rugen, and Vicini. They obviously also have obligations in respect of information management, which they owe to Florin in accordance with the terms of their individual appointments. As I said, they're all contained within the overall umbrella of the appointment, and that the information particulars have to identify where those documents relevant to their obligations can be found. Next slide, please. So, in terms of their obligations, obviously, I've again at a very high level, they need to be aware of their risk allocations within their individual appointments. They're obliged to establish a risk register to ensure compliance with the protocol. They comply, of course, with security requirements to the extent that they need to, not very much in this case, after the initial security triage and sensitivity assessment's been undertaken. They'd then have to play their part in preparing the information management documents and set up the systems for its delivery. Next slide, please. This is a picture of me attempting to learn maths. Never been very good at adding up. Other obligations in relation to information management risk, as in clause 6, 5 and 6 in relation to CD solution and workflow. They play their part in that, in establishing, implementing and configuring the CD solution and workflow. In clause 6, carrying out their information management tasks, which are their responsibility under the information particulars. They have to consider whether all of their IP rights and licenses are in place and correct. And as I've already mentioned, in fact, the appointment in this particular case does cover that. So you don't need to refer back to any great degree to what's set out in clause 8 of the protocol. They need to establish the level of information need, which again is something that they will establish with Florin. And as I said again, sort of help capture lessons learned from the project as they go through. And in relation to the some obligations specifically on Wesley as contractor, it has to carry out a risk assessment to form the preparation and effective management of information. That's in clause 9. And assists Florin, as I've said, in relation to capturing lessons learned. So I've gone very quickly through that. I've picked out some specific bits because I suppose what I'm trying to say is really you need to bear in mind that the protocol is intended to provide, to gather together in one place, the relevant legal and contractual obligations that as a sort of base starting point need to be considered and observed. You should tweak that template to suit your project. And one of the reasons why we tried it with a slightly different scenario to what you might expect is to show that actually it works equally well when you've got more than one appointee in place. And then, of course, there is a process through which the protocol goes, which mirrors that of the ISO 19652. So that's it from my bit. I think if we go on to the next slide, we have some time for a Q&A.
Brilliant. Thank you both. We've had a few questions coming, so I will ask them and feel free for you to choose who answers them. So the first one is the appointee party always the appointee?
No. So going back to my earlier slide about you're the appointer or the appointee, and then you're the appointing party, the lead appointed party or the appointed party. So giving you a couple of different scenarios, you could have an appointment between the appointing party and the lead appointed party. And so the appointing party would be the appointor, the one doing the paying the bills, and the lead appointed party would be the appointee, so the one doing the services and getting paid. But you could then have an appointment between the lead appointed party, say a contractor, and the appointed party, say one of their subcontractors. And in that case, the contractor, the lead appointed party, would be the appointor, so the one paying, and the appointed party, the subcontractor, would be the appointee, so the one doing the work and being paid.
Thank you, May. Next question is around security content. Does the protocol need to include any security rules that the client wants?
Simon, you may be best placed to answer that one.
Yeah, I'll do that. I think that, does the protocol have to? No, I don't think the protocol has to, but because it's already got a number of clauses in it in relation to security. One is in clause 3 that I've mentioned about the initial assessment, and that if in fact you do consider, once the assessment's been undertaken, that it does require a security-minded approach, then there is a cross-referral back to ISO 19655, which sets out what you have to do. And there are various other clauses in the protocol about failure to comply with security requirements. But it may be the case that for this specific project that you're on, whatever that may be, the client does want to add some more specific security requirements that are project specific, in which case that's something to be discussed and agreed with the client.
Okay, thank you. What about information cyber security requirements?
I think that will be very, yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, go on, after you, May.
No, I was going to say part of that will be very project specific, because you'll have, client will have some requirements in their, say, EIR or just in their contract documents generally about cyber security. But Simon, you are also going to add in?
Yeah. No, I was going to say that yes, that's absolutely right. And I mean, information cybersecurity is covered by ISO 19655, so it's sort of the same thing.
Okay, thank you. What is the difference between the definitions for the delivery phase and a project in terminology when using the protocol?
You can start with that one, May.
Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, sorry. What is the difference between the definitions for the delivery phase and a project in terminology when using the protocol? If they are synonymous, then why are there two terms? Two terms even. No?
I'm not sure I understand. Sorry.
Well, shall I just?
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, can I just chip in? I mean, I think that there might be a slight cross wires there in that this protocol is just about the delivery phase. Then we've got the operational phase, and I think the terminology is largely the same in terms of appointor and appointee and a lead appointed parties and so on. But we're working on that at the moment. But the idea was to make the two ISO protocols the same in terms of terminology, because in fact the equivalent previous documents, the PAS 1192, 2 and 3, read very differently when you went from one to the other. But in this, the idea now is a lot of work's being done to make ISO 19650 Part 3 follow on from Part 2. So I anticipate there won't be much change in terminology between the two. The other terminology point I think that May was on is the difference between appointor and appointee, and lead appointed party and appointing parties, which is something we're just slightly stuck with because of the way the ISO works. But as we said, particularly if you have a two-party protocol, you can actually put the parties' names in the protocol if you want.
Okay, thank
I'm not
you
sure
both.
that answers the question.
We can take it offline, and then if there's more comments
Sure.
you'd like to add, we can do that afterwards as well. Is there a benefit to developing an information protocol using the template provided over incorporating the relevant conditions within the project conditions of contract?
If I take that, I would say that it's easier just to include it as a schedule, because whenever you cut and paste, you also have to then check how it impacts the rest of the clauses. However, it depends on the form of contract you're using. So, for example, the NEC doesn't have schedules or appendices, so you have to include it within. And the NEC has issued guidance on how you use the information protocol and include it within the body of the NEC. And so that's just something to bear in mind. But I would say in terms of just how you place it, there's no specific answer, but certainly if you are going to put it into your contract, do get legal advice on how you do that.
Okay, thank you. How does the protocol deal with the issue of multiple concurrent information models from multiple LAPs?
Shall I start, and then after
Yeah, sure.
you may have to. I think I mean, in one sense, the example I've gone through just now, you could have had multiple LAPs as well as multiple appointees. If it had been, let's say, you know, an even more extensive project, there's no reason why the contractual relationship between the client and various delivery teams would have involved a series of contractors, say more than one contractor involved, with each with its own delivery team of subcontractors. So in that case, you would still have the same position that I tried to outline in the example, where the actual rights and obligations in respect of each individual LAP's relationship with the client are set out in their respective contracts. And their rights and obligations in relation to information management, if you like, are set out in the protocol. And the protocol still works, even if you have multiple LAPs. In terms of information models, of course, then you would need to make sure that your requirements, or your contractual requirements and your information management requirements, dealt with how to federate these models adequately, which it should do anyway, I think, whether you're talking about multiple models across LAPs or up the supply chain.
Thank you. Just to pick up on some of the points on that one, do agreements with subcontractors need to have their own specific protocol document?
Well, I think there needs to be a separate information protocol per appointment, and whether that's a multi-party appointment or between two parties, every appointment needs to have, fundamentally every appointment needs to have BIM terms. How are people going to comply with the ISO? What are the processes? What documents are applicable? And so whether it's contractor to subcontractor, consultant to contractor, it is almost irrelevant. It's any of the parties, because without that, you are entering into a contract which probably doesn't go much beyond, we want you to do some BIM at some point, which leads to a whole host of uncertainties.
Thank you. I have one more question. Is it correct to say, sorry, I'm just trying to read it. Is it correct to say, because the information protocol has to be attached to every appointment in the project, there have to be various amendments to the information particular sheet?
The information particulars is a blank document that you fill in, kind of like a checklist or schedule. So in each time you attach it to one of your appointments, you'll then fill it in, who are the parties, what's the name of the project, and which each of the documents that's relevant for that appointment. So you don't have to amend it each time. You're filling in a new one for that particular appointment. So it'll be appointment specific. The reason being the documentation which is relevant for the 2 parties or the 4 parties, whatever it may be, for that appointment may be different from the appointment for one of the other 2 parties for that project. So going back to my earlier example, where you have an appointment between, say, the client and the contractor, and then you may have an appointment between the contractor and his subcontractors, the TIDP won't be relevant to the appointment between the client and the contractor, but the MIDP will be. So the bits that you fill in and the location of the documents may differ.
Thank you, May. Can you just explain what the acronym MIDP and TIDP stand for?
Master Information Delivery Plan and Task Information Delivery Plan. I would highly recommend, for those of you who are relatively new to BIM and the unending list of acronyms that there are, have a look at the rest of the guidance, which is on the UK BIM framework website, which not only explains what they are, but also has examples of templates. And I found that very helpful in explaining to fellow lawyers about this, because when you see what one looks like, it's easier to understand what you use it for.
Thank you, May. Thank you, Simon. At this time, I want to thank you both for your presentations and thank everyone else for attending the webinar. As a reminder, we have our next webinar at 12 o'clock this afternoon, and that is around Guidance Part E, Tendering and Appointments with Dan Rossiter. So please do join us for that one. Again, thank you, Simon, thank you, May, and thank you everyone for attending. I'm going to end the webinar here. Thank you.